Imagine being 16 years old, wrapped in heavy silk, convinced you're being escorted toward a wedding ceremony, and instead being guided into a locked chamber deep inside the Imperial Palace. The doors close behind you, not for privacy, but for control. The women in the room are not guests. They are attendants, instructors, witnesses. A court physician stands nearby, silent, prepared to record what will follow. You were told this was tradition. What no one explained was that every movement, every hesitation, every sound would be remembered and judged. The months of enforced silence suddenly make sense. So does your mother's expression that morning, the way her hands lingered while arranging your hair, the way she avoided your eyes, not out of indifference, but because meeting them would have shattered her composure. Because this ceremony is not about love. It is about obedience. This is not fiction. For more than 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire maintained a system so meticulously designed, so psychologically severe, that even its most ruthless enemies would not have wished it upon their own children. A system discussed only in whispers, and later erased almost entirely. The year was 1623, and a 16-year-old princess was about to learn that imperial marriage had 2 faces. The public one, celebrations, music, blessings, gold, and the private one, performed behind sealed doors, documented in silence, remembered only by those it broke. What happened that night was not a private tragedy. It was a hidden cost of power, a price every daughter of a sultan was expected to pay. When this story reaches a moment that unsettles you most, pause and tell me where you're watching from, because no one should witness this alone. Now return with me to the empire itself. For over 6 centuries, from 1299 to 1922, the Ottoman Empire stretched like a shoreless ocean across 3 continents. Its armies thundered from the walls of Vienna to the deserts of Yemen. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the city was transformed into Istanbul. The beating heart of imperial authority, and Topkapi Palace rose as its most dazzling symbol. Within those gilded walls, the fate of nations was decided, but in the shadows, the fate of souls was sealed. Hidden behind lattice windows and endless corridors, the imperial harem formed a parallel world, a sealed universe where more than 800 women lived at the height of its splendor. Every breath was observed, every gesture measured. Advancement and destruction were often separated by a single misstep. By 1530, when the title of Asiki Sultan was bestowed upon Hurrem Sultan, the harem became more than a domestic space. It became a battlefield of alliances, ambition, and silent wars waged without swords. Concubines, most of them Christian captives taken from Europe or purchased in North African markets, entered the palace stripped of their past, yet clinging to hope. Their days were filled with music, poetry, embroidery, and ritual obedience, all devoted to a single fragile possibility, catching the Sultan's attention. Ironically, many of these enslaved women possessed more paths to influence and even to freedom than the daughters born at the very summit of power, because royal blood carried its own prison. During the period historians now call the Sultanate women, figures like Kozum Sultan and Turan Hadisi Sultan wielded astonishing authority, guiding councils, steering wars, and ruling from behind veils of protocol. Their power reshaped the empire itself. Yet, while these women governed from the shadows, the princesses of the dynasty lived under an entirely different fate. They were not rulers. They were guarantees, human clauses in diplomatic agreements, living seals on alliances, pawns placed to secure loyalty, suppress rebellion, or reward obedience among powerful men. It was into this system that Princess Fatma Sultan was born in 1606, the daughter of Sultan Ahmed and Kozum Sultan, a woman capable of ruling an empire without ever sitting on the throne. Fatma grew up among gardens, scholars, and manuscripts in Arabic and Persian. Chroniclers praised her intelligence. Tutors marveled at her discipline. She studied astronomy, calligraphy, history, and law. By all accounts, she was exceptional. She spoke 4 languages fluently. She debated learned men with calm confidence. She gazed at the night sky with a curiosity that unsettled her tutors. because curiosity was dangerous for a princess, and none of it mattered. From the moment she was born, her life was never truly her own. Her destiny had already been written. She would be given in marriage, not for love, not for choice, not for happiness, but as an instrument of power. Her body would serve diplomacy. Her obedience would seal alliances. From her first breath, Princess Fatma Sultan's future had been inscribed on invisible parchments. She would be married not when she was ready, nor she wished it, but when the empire required it. And so the decision was made. The man chosen was Kara Mustafa Pasha, a commander hardened by years of war against Persia, nearly 18 years older than her. The union was not born of affection or even familiarity. It was forged through calculation. For him, marriage meant advancement, protection, and proximity to the throne. For her, still in her mid-teens, it meant becoming a living instrument of state policy, a piece placed carefully on the imperial chessboard. Then, 3 months before the wedding, the true ordeal began. The process was called Turbai Mubarak, the so-called sacred preparation, reserved exclusively for imperial princesses. It had no true equivalent anywhere else in the world. This was not education. It was conditioning, a system refined over centuries to strip royal daughters of pride and replace it with unquestioning obedience. The woman appointed to oversee it was Humaira Hatton, nearly 60 years old, head of the harem and a veteran of more than a dozen such preparations. She had seen princesses break before. She knew exactly how long it usually took. Under her unyielding supervision, Fatma Sultan was led into the dais, the bride's chamber, a room lined with Persian carpets and shadowed ebony panels. Nothing inside was decorative. Every object carried intention. Every angle reminded the girl of her purpose. From dawn until midday, day after day, Fatma, now 16, was forced to rehearse rituals of reverence. 18 distinct forms of bowing, each assigned a function: how to greet, how to serve, how to kneel, how to lie down, how to wait in silence for her husband's arrival. Even walking ceased to be instinctive. She was drilled in the urus and the seat, steps measured to the width of a finger, head lowered to exactly 30 degrees, hands never rising above the heart. Every movement erased the memory of who she had been. Every correction pushed her closer to the figure she was expected to become. But movement was only the beginning. Speech became the most merciless discipline of all. Fatma's vocabulary was reduced to 43 approved words, expressions of gratitude, apology, submission, and acceptance. Nothing else. Any attempt to speak freely, any deviation of tone, any question asked out of turn was punished. Fasting, isolation in damp rooms of reflection, public humiliation before the court. Her obedience was not assumed. It was tested. At regular intervals, Fatma was brought before a tribunal of women in veils, presided over by her own mother, Kozum Sultan. There, her compliance was evaluated like currency, measured, weighed, judged. And still, this was not the worst part. Hidden beneath the palace, in underground chambers few ever entered, preparations for the first night began. They were called Talim and Girk. Exact replicas of bridal chambers had been constructed below ground. Inside them stood wax mannequins, anatomical figures commissioned from Venetian artisans, crafted with unsettling precision. Before stern instructors, Fatma was forced to rehearse gestures and expectations no girl her age should have been made to understand. Every reaction was recorded in coded logs: fear, tears, resistance. Each sign of distress condemned her to more sessions, more repetition, more conditioning. Slowly, methodically, the girl who once gazed at the stars was reduced to a compliant body, her curiosity dismantled, her spirit disciplined into silence. She was no longer a daughter of emperors. She was an apprentice to her fate, and the training did not end there. Beyond posture, movement, and silence came endurance. Any sign of resistance, a lifted chin, a misplaced sigh, a defiant glance, brought punishment, prolonged fasting until weakness set in, repetitive drills designed to exhaust the body, confinement in cold, airless cells. Often these humiliations were carried out before the entire female court. Not privately, not discreetly, but publicly, as if she were a disobedient servant rather than a princess of imperial blood. Alongside physical control came mental purification. Fatima Sultan was forced to memorize verses drawn from Ottoman and Persian treatises on marital obedience. Passages from Nezahat al-Muluk and Akhlaq Asmani filled her days, texts that praised submission, sacrifice, and the erasure of self as sacred virtues. She recited them aloud before concubines and eunuchs who acted as judges. The girl who once spoke eagerly of astronomy and poetry now repeated words crafted to extinguish her will. Prayer, too, became a weapon. 5 times each day, at precisely fixed hours, Fatima, now 17, was required to perform specially composed prayers written by the empire's ulama. These were not acts of personal faith. They were instruments of control, prayers designed to dissolve individuality and redirect devotion entirely toward her future husband. Even her body learned submission through worship, and still the humiliations continued. Twice each week, before the entire female court, Fatima was compelled to serve her own father's favorite concubines. She washed them, combed their hair, fed them by hand, and dressed them for their nights with the Sultan. The ritual was deliberate. It was meant to crush the final remnants of pride, to teach the princess that even those who shared her father's bed stood above her. Witnesses later noted that Fatima often broke down in sobs while fastening garments on those women, her hands trembling as the court watched in silence. 1 week before the wedding, the regimen intensified. Fatima was moved to the Jelen Kasku, the bride's pavilion, an isolated structure sealed from outside sound. There, every detail of her existence was controlled. Her meals were regulated with precision. Pomegranates, honey, almonds, goat's milk, Yemeni spices. Her baths were supervised daily, using perfumed oils infused with valerian, poppy, and orange blossom. The elixirs were prepared by alchemists trained in Cordoba and Samarkand, designed to calm, to soften, to induce surrender. The walls of the pavilion were draped with tapestries depicting ideal wives, obedient, fertile, silent, promised heavenly rewards for submission. Venetian mirrors were placed strategically throughout the rooms, forcing Fatima to observe herself constantly, as if her own gaze had become another form of surveillance. By then, she understood the truth. Her body no longer belonged to her. Her voice had been reduced to fragments. Even her thoughts no longer felt safe. And the empire was not finished with her yet. The day of the wedding was approaching, and what awaited her then would complete what this preparation had begun. This final practice was known as muraqabah in its original form. It was a Sufi mystical exercise, a method of inward reflection meant to discipline the mind. Inside the palace, it was transformed into something else entirely. A psychological weapon, a system designed to force the princess to surveil herself. Not only her actions, but her thoughts. Even her inner world was no longer her own. In that isolation, Fatima began to understand the full extent of what had been done to her. She was no longer the mistress of her own life. Her body had been trained into obedience. Her voice had been reduced to fragments. Her thoughts reshaped into reflexes of submission. The preparation had achieved its purpose. The curious, brilliant girl who once imagined the heavens had been methodically erased. Then the day arrived, March 15th, 1623. From the first pale light of dawn, Istanbul throbbed like an overfilled heart. Incense drifted through the streets. Drums and flutes echoed across stone and water. Processions wound through the city in carefully ordered splendor. Inside Topkapi Palace, banquets were laid upon gold tableware, and guests passed through halls alive with celebration. Dancers arrived from Persia and Al-Andalus. Court singers performed verses written for the occasion. Janissaries competed before the Sultan, displaying strength, discipline, and flawless obedience. To the city, it appeared as a festival blessed by heaven itself. For Fatima Sultan, now 17, it was a sentence being carried out. Chroniclers later observed that while guests laughed and drank, the princess remained silent. Her lips were pale and dry. Her gaze drifted without focus. Palace physicians watched her closely, noting tremors in her hands, cold sweat despite the cool March air, loss of appetite, and sudden shallow breathing. Symptoms we would now recognize as severe anxiety. Public splendor concealed private terror. When the final toast was raised and the civilian guests withdrew, the most dreaded moment began. Fatma was escorted away from the great halls and led toward the nuptial pavilion, hidden deep within the palace gardens. Its design followed ancestral plans dating back to the reign of Mem II. The structure was octagonal, divided into 3 ascending levels, each assigned a specific function: purification, presentation, and consummation. Nothing in its design was accidental. Every corridor, every threshold, every turn had been calculated to strip the princess of agency and convert the ceremony into an act of total submission. The first level was known as Tara Kati, the Chamber of Purification. There, Fatma underwent ritual baths that lasted for hours. Polished marmar marble reflected torchlight across the water. Essences of damask rose, sesame oil, sandalwood, and Somali ambergris clung to her skin. Court alchemists applied ointments infused with diluted opium, mandrake, and other calming substances intended to dull resistance and soften awareness. Physicians recorded the resulting state as sukun, a controlled serenity, what they described as an ecstasy of submission. The second level was Teslim Kati, the floor of surrender. Here, Fatma was dressed in her wedding gown, white silk woven with gold thread, adorned with pearls drawn from the Persian Gulf. To any outsider, it appeared regal and magnificent. In truth, it was engineered for restraint. Hidden cords and internal fastenings restricted movement. The way of the crown forced her chin downward. Anklets and bracelets subtly shortened her stride. Thick-soled ceremonial shoes made rapid movement impossible. The garment was a prison disguised as splendor. As Fatma was transformed into a symbol of dynastic obedience, her future husband, Kara Mustafa Pasha, underwent preparations of an entirely different nature. Surrounded by advisors and seasoned war veterans, Kara Mustafa Pasha received instruction not on love or partnership, but on domination. He was taught methods of intimidation, carefully crafted phrases meant to humiliate, and techniques to assert authority over an imperial princess. There would be no uncertainty in this union, no resistance tolerated. Then came the ascent to the third level, Cif Kati, the Chamber of Consummation. Its walls were adorned with tapestries depicting conquered cities, defeated armies, and captive princesses. The imagery was deliberate, drawing a stark parallel between victory in war and victory in the marriage bed. The furniture itself had been designed for control. Beds with hidden cord mechanisms, cushions soaked in calming oils, and low, disorienting light to weaken resolve. It was here, amidst symbols of conquest, that Fatma Sultan faced her most feared night. Barely supported by her own breath, she became the living seal of a political pact. Official chronicles later described the wedding as a triumph. But inside Cif Kati, a far different reality unfolded. When the doors closed behind the procession, Fatma was left alone with her husband. Medical records of the period describe what followed as a complete collapse of the spirit. Months of relentless discipline and humiliation had exhausted her capacity to respond. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Her eyes drifted, fixated on nothing visible to the observers. Imperial physicians later labeled her condition as SMA and TAM, total shock. At first, Kara Mustafa Pasha, trained in sieges and battlefield strategy, interpreted her state as defiance. He believed arrogance needed to be broken and applied the techniques he had been taught: intimidation, control force, and calculated gestures of dominance. But there was no rebellion to overcome, only emptiness. Fatma was no longer present. Her mind had retreated into deep dissociation, abandoning her body as the only means of survival. When the marriage was eventually consummated after hours of failed attempts, hidden observers recorded it as traumatic for all involved. Persian-coded documents speak of internal hemorrhaging, repeated loss of consciousness, and what physicians termed RU sukmek, the departure of the soul. From that night onward, Fatma Sultan was never the same. In the days that followed, even the strictest instructors in the harem were alarmed. The princess developed selective mutism, speaking only when directly addressed, and then only in whispers. Her appetite vanished entirely, forcing attendants to feed her against her will. The brilliant, curious child who once debated scholars and studied the stars had disappeared. What came next would ensure she never returned. Episodes of uncontrollable crime began without warning, sometimes lasting hours. Worse still, what court chroniclers referred to as the disease of fear soon emerged, embedding itself as a permanent shadow over her life. The mere presence of a man, even a trusted eunuch's, was enough to send the princess into a state of panic. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her skin slick with sweat. Sudden fainting spells forced attendants to scramble, keeping her upright and conscious. Court physicians described the condition as virginal melancholy, noting that it was common among imperial princesses after their first wedding night. Their descriptions were clinical, almost attached, treating the collapse of mind and spirit as an expected outcome rather than tragedy. In modern terms, there is no ambiguity. Fatma had suffered irreversible trauma, a psychological wound beyond the reach of any conventional remedy. Attempts at healing, herbal remedies, music therapy, and Sufi spiritual exercises intended to restore balance to the soul proved useless. Nothing could return the girl she had once been. In her place existed only a subdued, obedient presence. Books remained closed, instruments gathered dust, and the gardens she had once wandered in all were deserted. The daughter of the most powerful sultan on earth had become a silent shadow of unrealized potential. Her marriage to Kara Mustafa Pasha continued mechanically. Children were born, formal appearances were made, and the outward illusion of stability endured. Behind closed doors, however, silence reigned. Distance replaced intimacy. Routine replaced connection. Later memoirs indicate that the Pasha himself sought solace in military campaigns and opium, attempting to drown the guilt of having participated in a ritual that had effectively destroyed the woman he married. Fatma Sultan lived another 29 years after that night. She became a ceremonial ornament, a wife without a voice, an obliged mother. Her death occurred in 1652, officially attributed to a brain fever, coinciding with the anniversary of her wedding. Within the palace, many believed it was no coincidence. An invisible weight of memory had finally caught up with her soul. Fatma's fate was not unique. It was part of a broader pattern. Palace archives recovered centuries later show that dozens of Ottoman princesses endured similar destinies. Some were permanently silenced by mutism. Others attempted escape through suicide or madness. A few vanished entirely from records, erased as though they had never existed. The imperial system, meticulous in its protocols, was equally skilled at erasing inconvenient lives. Truth was replaced with euphemism, names with silence. Yet, even in this darkness, traces of resistance persisted. Recently translated documents reveal princesses who faked their own deaths to avoid a second marriage, those who devised secret codes to communicate with sisters trapped in similar circumstances, and rare individuals who boldly petitioned the Sultan for divorce, defying a system that appeared unbreakable. These stories, long buried in forbidden archives, prove that even in the deepest shadows, the spirit of resistance never fully vanished. The fate of Fatma Sultan and of countless women like her reveals a truth that history prefers not to confront. Absolute power does not always shield those nearest to it. Often, it devours them first. While the world imagined Ottoman princesses living lives of endless privilege, silk, and protection, the reality was far more insidious, an invisible system of control, refined through ritual, enforced through obedience, and justified in the name of empire. What generations were taught to see as romantic dynastic unions were, in reality, political mechanisms that consumed the very daughters they claimed to honor. The fairy tale dissolved behind palace walls, replaced by calculated sacrifice. These women were not beneficiaries of empire. They were its currency. And this forces a final, unsettling question. How many similar truths remain locked inside royal archives around the world? What rituals were hidden behind the facades of European courts, Russian dynasties, or Chinese imperial households? What unseen cost did women bear to sustain the illusion of imperial greatness? If Fatma's story lingers with you, remain with us for what comes next. Subscribe, share this history with those who deserve to know what was deliberately forgotten, and leave a comment naming the queen or princess whose story should be uncovered next. Because only by bringing these buried lives into the light can the voices silenced by power finally be heard.